I didn't know my family was laughing at dinner when the first comment appeared under the video. I was still in my dress blues, sitting alone in my car, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed once. Then again, someone I didn't recognize had tagged my sister and written, "Isn't this your sister?" That was how it started. Not with applause, not with a broadcast on a restaurant TV, but with a link, a pause, and the slow, sickening realization that the thing they had dismissed all their lives was now sitting in their pockets, impossible to ignore. My name is Emily Carter, and I serve in the United States Air Force. That sentence still feels heavier than it sounds. Not because of the uniform or the responsibility, but because of how many times it's been brushed aside. Even now, after years of service, there's a part of me that still hears my father's voice in the back of my head, flattening it into something smaller. "You're just support. You're not really doing anything." The email came in on a Wednesday afternoon while I was at my desk on base. Fluorescent lights, government-issued chair, a stack of folders waiting to be signed off before the end of the day. I almost missed it because the subject line looked like a dozen others I'd opened before. Quarterly Awards Banquet Official Notification. I clicked it without thinking, skimmed the first paragraph, then stopped and went back to the beginning. My supervisor had submitted a package for me weeks earlier. I hadn't expected it to go anywhere. Packages go up the chain all the time. Most stall. Some come back with notes. A few disappear quietly. This one hadn't. The wing had approved it. I was being recognized with an Air Force Achievement Medal at the quarterly awards banquet. Commanders call formal ceremony, families invited. The event would be recorded and posted afterward on the wing's Facebook page and the base YouTube channel like they always did. I sat back in my chair and let the information settle. There was no rush of adrenaline, no urge to stand up and tell someone, just a deep, steady feeling in my chest. Not pride exactly, more like confirmation. The quiet kind that comes when something you've carried alone for a long time is finally acknowledged by the people who understand the weight of it. After a minute, I picked up my phone. I hesitated longer than I want to admit. Not because I didn't want my family there, but because inviting them felt like reopening a door I'd spent years closing carefully. Still, this mattered. And somewhere in me, a smaller, older version of myself wanted them to see it. The family group chat was unchanged. My sister Rachel's name at the top. My mother's heart reaction scattered through old messages. My father's last contribution weeks ago, a thumbs-up emoji on something Rachel had posted. I typed slowly. "Hey, I wanted to let you know I'm being recognized at a formal Air Force Awards banquet next Friday. It's a commander call, and families are invited. I'd really like it if you could come." I reread it. No exaggeration, no explanation, just the facts. The typing bubbles appeared almost immediately. Rachel replied first. "Isn't that just an internal thing like admin work?" She added a laughing emoji. "We already have dinner plans that night. Don't be mad." A second message followed, this time from my father. "Awards banquet for what? You're not an officer. Sounds like a secretary award if you ask me." I felt the familiar tightening behind my ribs. Not sharp, not new, just there. Then my mother reacted. She didn't type anything. She didn't ask a question. She tapped the little thumbs-up icon under Rachel's message. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. The office around me hummed softly. Keyboards, printers, muted conversations drifting through the hallway. No one noticed the way my shoulders dropped just a fraction. I could have explained. I could have told them about my AFSC, about what my job actually involved, about the nights I'd stayed late coordinating timelines, managing information flow, making sure the right people had what they needed when it mattered. I could have said achievement medal instead of award and watched them pretend it sounded more respectable. I didn't. I typed one line. "It's okay. I understand." Rachel sent a wine glass emoji. My father didn't respond. My mother's thumbs up remained. I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to work. Growing up in Ohio, I learned early how to read a room and make myself smaller inside it. Rachel was 3 years older, louder, effortlessly confident. She took up space without apologizing for it. And my parents built their world around her momentum. School plays, sports banquets, Celebrations that felt automatic, like gravity. I was the reliable one, the kid who didn't need reminders. When I brought home a certificate for an academic competition in middle school, my father glanced at it and said, "Good job," before sliding it into a drawer with old tax documents and instruction manuals. That drawer became a metaphor I carried longer than I realized. When I told them I wanted to join the Air Force after high school, the reaction was predictable. My father said it wasn't a real career. My mother worried it was dangerous. Rachel joked that I'd chosen camouflage because I was already good at disappearing. I joined anyway. Basic training stripped me down and rebuilt me in ways my family never saw. Over time, I found a role that fit me. Structured, detail-oriented, demanding. I wasn't on the front of brochures. I wasn't in photos. I was the person people called when they needed something done right the first time. At home, none of that translated. On visits, my father introduced me as working in the military, mostly paperwork. Rachel nodded along. My mother smiled and changed the subject. I stopped correcting them years ago. It never helped. So, when the awards banquet email came, I didn't expect a miracle. I invited them, because that's what you do. Because some part of me still believed that if I laid the truth out plainly enough, they might meet it where it stood. Instead, they chose dinner. I pressed my uniform that night in silence, smoothing each crease with care. Not for them, for myself. As I hung it up, I caught my reflection in the mirror, older, steadier, less willing to explain. They thought it was small. They always had. What they didn't know was that the video would be posted the next day. That people from my unit would share it. That someone who recognized our last name would tag Rachel without malice, just surprise. And once something like that exists online, it has a way of finding its audience, whether they're ready or not. There are families who fight loudly, who slam doors and say things they regret, and then spend years repairing the damage. Ours was never like that. In my family, disappointment was quiet. It lived in pauses, in glances, in the way a conversation shifted just enough to remind you where you stood. That was how I learned my place. The drawer came first. I was 11 when I won my first academic competition, state level. A small ceremony in a school gym that smelled like floor polish and popcorn. They handed me a certificate with my name spelled correctly, which felt important at the time. I held it carefully all the way home, smoothing the edges with my thumbs, imagining where my parents might hang it. My father glanced at it while standing at the counter. "Good job," he said, already turning back to something else. My mother smiled and asked if I was hungry. Rachel asked if she could borrow the car later. That night, I watched my father slide the certificate into a drawer in the hallway. Not a special drawer, the one with expired warranties, spare batteries, folded instruction manuals for appliances we no longer owned. The drawer you close without thinking. I didn't say anything. I just memorized the sound it made. Rachel's things went on walls. She was the kind of child adults loved immediately. Confident, expressive. She spoke like she expected to be heard. And most of the time, she was right. When she won something, it was announced. When she failed, it was discussed at length, framed as a setback on an otherwise impressive trajectory. I was easy, low maintenance. My parents used that word like a compliment. I learned to translate it early. You don't require much attention. My father, Richard, valued outcomes he could explain quickly to other people. Sales numbers, promotions, job titles that carried weight without context. He liked to say things like, "If it matters, people will know about it." He meant visibility. He meant status. My mother, Linda, believed in harmony, or at least the appearance of it. She avoided conflict the way some people avoid bad weather by stepping inside and hoping it passed. When my father dismissed something I cared about, she would squeeze my shoulder later and say, "You know how he is," as if that explained everything. By high school, the pattern was set. Rachel took center stage. I moved through the background competent and quiet. Teachers praised my work ethic. Counselors said I'd do well anywhere. My parents nodded, satisfied that I was on track, even if they weren't sure where that track led. The first time I mentioned the Air Force, it was during dinner. Nothing dramatic, just a sentence. I'm thinking about joining after graduation. My father didn't look up from his plate.
Why?
I want something structured, I said. I want to serve. Rachel laughed. That's what people say when they don't know what else to do. My mother frowned. It's dangerous.
My father finally looked at me then.
It's not a career, he said. It's a stopgap. I remember nodding like I was considering his point, even though something in me had already decided. I didn't join to rebel. I joined because the Air Force offered something my family never had: clear expectations. Clear standards. You either met them or you didn't. No guessing. No reading between lines. Basic training was hard in ways I'd expected and harder in ways I hadn't. But it was fair. Effort mattered.
Precision mattered.
Accountability mattered. When I struggled, I was corrected. When I improved, it was noted. No one asked me to be louder or shinier. They asked me to be reliable. That felt like relief. When I graduated and sent a photo home in uniform, standing straight, name tape, crisp, my mother framed it. She put it on the hallway shelf, not the living room, not the office, the hallway. My father looked at it and said, "So, what's the plan after this?" After this, as if it were a phase. Over the years, I found my lane. I trained into an AFSC that fit my strengths: coordination, information management, problem solving under pressure. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't meant to be. It was essential. My supervisor noticed. Then her supervisor packages went up the chain. Most of the time, nothing came back down. That was normal. I learned not to announce things at home. When I earned accommodation early on, I mailed a copy of the citation to my parents. My mother called to say she'd received it. "I put it somewhere safe," she said. "With your other important papers." I didn't ask where. When I visited on leave, my father introduced me to neighbors as working in the military support side. Rachel nodded along, smiling like she was in on a joke I didn't understand. I smiled too. Correcting them felt exhausting, and exhaustion had taught me efficiency. I stopped trying to make them see me. That's what made the awards banquet email complicated. Not because I expected them to come running, but because inviting them felt like offering one last quiet opportunity, not to celebrate me, but to meet me where I was. Their response was familiar enough that it barely hurt. Dinner plans, laughter, a thumbs up instead of a question. The drawer closed again, only this time, I didn't reach for it. By the time I made staff sergeant, I had stopped announcing promotions altogether. Not because they didn't matter, but because every time I tried to explain what they meant, the explanation collapsed under the weight of my family's assumptions. Rank to them was something you either recognized immediately or dismissed entirely. If it didn't come with a corner office or a title they'd heard on television, it didn't register as real progress. So, I learned to let my career unfold quietly. My AFSC was 3D0x1 knowledge operations. On paper, it sounded abstract, vague. The kind of job description people skim and then summarize incorrectly. In practice, it meant I managed information flow across units, coordinated timelines, ensured decision-makers had what they needed before problems became failures. It was not glamorous. It was not visible, and it was absolutely critical. When things worked, no one noticed. When they didn't, everything stopped. I liked that responsibility. I liked knowing that comm planning could prevent chaos. I liked being the person commanders trusted to make sense of complexity without needing credit for it. At home, it translated to one sentence. "So, paperwork," my father said once, leaning back in his chair. I didn't correct him. There's a point where explaining becomes a kind of begging. I crossed that line years earlier and never went back. On base, my day started before sunrise. The air was cooler than heavy with the smell of jet fuel and burnt coffee. I'd walk into the building with my badge clipped just right, already reviewing the day's priorities in my head. Briefings, cross-checks, calls that couldn't wait. My supervisor noticed early on that I didn't panic. When timelines shifted or information conflicted, I slowed down instead of speeding up. That mattered. In our world, clarity under pressure was currency. She started giving me more responsibility. Not loudly, not ceremonially, just quietly handing me things that mattered.
"Take this," she'd say.
Run point. "I trust you." Trust is the most honest form of recognition in the military. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with consequences. Over time, my name began to surface in places I wasn't present for. Meetings, recommendation packages, conversations that happened behind closed doors. I didn't chase them.
I didn't need to.
The work spoke when I didn't. At home, nothing changed. When I came back on leave, my father still asked when I was getting out. My mother still worried I was working too hard for something temporary. Rachel still rolled her eyes when I mentioned another assignment. "You're still doing that?" she asked once, genuinely confused. "I thought you'd move on by now." I looked at her and realized she wasn't being cruel. She simply couldn't imagine a life built slowly without spectacle. That was when I stopped hoping for understanding. The awards package that eventually led to the banquet started like all the others quietly. My supervisor submitted it after a long quarter where our section had absorbed extra workload without missing deadlines. She didn't tell me right away. Most supervisors don't. You submit, you wait, you manage expectations. It moved faster than I expected. Squadron level group wing. When she finally called me into her office and said they approved it, her voice was calm, professional, like she was telling me about a schedule change. "You'll receive an Air Force Achievement Medal at the quarterly banquet," she added. "You earned it." That was it. No confetti, no speech, just confirmation. I thanked her and went back to work. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall for a long time. I thought about all the times I'd been told my job didn't count, that I was support, that I was filling time. And yet, here was an institution built on precision and accountability, saying this mattered. That contrast stayed with me. When I invited my family, I didn't dress it up. I didn't say medal. I didn't list the chain of approvals. I said awards banquet because that's what it was. They heard small. I heard final confirmation that I no longer needed their scale to measure my life. The night before the ceremony, I pressed my dress blues carefully. Every crease sharp, every detail correct. I wasn't performing. I was preparing like I always did. As I hung the uniform back up, I realized something quietly without drama. If they never understood my job, that didn't make it less real. It just meant I'd finally stopped trying to translate my worth into a language they refused to learn. The morning of the awards banquet arrived the way most important days do, quietly, without fanfare. No sense of destiny, no dramatic music, just an alarm at 0500, the familiar weight of routine, and the soft hum of the bass coming awake outside my window. I moved through my morning on autopilot. Shower, coffee, uniform laid out with the kind of care that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with respect. I checked each detail the way I always did. Ribbons, aligned shoes, polished insignia straight. When you spend years in the military, preparation becomes a language. It's how you say, "I take this seriously," without needing to announce it. At work, no one treated the day like anything special. That was normal, too. A quick "good luck tonight" from my supervisor. A nod from a colleague who knew what the ceremony meant, but didn't feel the need to dramatize it. Deadlines still existed. Emails still came in. The mission didn't pause for recognition. That steadiness grounded me. By late afternoon, I drove home and changed in silence. The apartment felt smaller with the uniform on, like the walls were leaning in to listen. I caught my reflection in the mirror and took a moment not to admire myself, but to register the distance between who I was and who my family still thought I was. Then I picked up my phone. No new messages in the group chat. No last-minute change of heart. No. Maybe we can stop by after dinner. Just silence, settled and complete. I put the phone down and left. The banquet was held on base in a large hall I'd been in dozens of times for briefings and mandatory events. That night, it looked different. Tables were dressed simply. Flags stood at attention along the walls. A small stage had been set at the front, flanked by a podium and a screen for slides. Families filled the room in clusters, spouses adjusting jackets, kids fidgeting in chairs, parents looking around with that particular mix of pride and uncertainty that comes from being close to something formal and unfamiliar. I noticed those details because I always did. Observation had become second nature. I took my seat with my unit. There was an empty chair beside me that no one commented on. The ceremony followed a familiar rhythm. Opening remarks, a brief overview of the quarter, recognition of collective efforts before individual names were called. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to be. The tone was measured, professional, earnest. When my name was called, I stood, walked to the stage, and accepted the medal with a handshake and a nod. The weight of it was reassuring in its solidity, not symbolic, real. There was polite applause. Smiles, cameras from the base public affairs office capturing the moment for the official record. I returned to my seat and sat down, heart steady, breathing even. It was over in minutes. Afterward, people mingled briefly. Congratulations were exchanged. Someone joked about how long the speeches ran. Another person asked where my family was. Couldn't make it, I said simply. No one pressed. That more than anything felt like respect. I left early, slipping out before the room fully emptied. The parking lot was cool and quiet, the sky darkening into a deep settled blue. I sat in my car for a moment with the medal resting on the passenger seat, its ribbon catching the overhead light. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt complete. The next morning, the base public affairs office posted the video. They always did. A short caption, a link to the full recording on YouTube, a few still photos attached, nothing dramatic, just documentation. Colleagues shared it. Family members of other recipients tagged each other. A friend from a previous assignment commented with a simple well-deserved. I didn't share it myself. Around noon, I got a notification I didn't recognize. A comment under the video from someone with my last name. Not Rachel, but someone else. A distant cousin I barely spoke to. Wait, is this Emily Carter from Dayton? A minute later, another comment appeared. Isn't that your sister? She looks different in uniform. Someone tagged Rachel. That was how it reached them. Not through a television mounted above a bar, not through a planned reveal, through a link, a pause, a moment where curiosity overrode dismissal. I imagined Rachel sitting at the table, phone in hand, the restaurant noise fading as the screen filled with a scene she'd chosen to skip. My father leaning over her shoulder, reading words he hadn't bothered to ask about. My mother watching quietly, her face doing that careful thing it did when she realized something important had slipped past her. There was no music cue, no freeze frame, just the slow, undeniable clarity of seeing me as I actually was, presented plainly without my commentary or apology. I didn't know what they said to each other. I didn't need to. My phone stayed silent the rest of the day. And for the first time, that silence felt earned. The first message didn't come from my family. It came from a number I didn't recognize late that afternoon while I was back at my desk, already buried in routine again. The subject line of the email was plain. No emojis, no excitement. Saw this and thought, you should know. There was a link. I hesitated before opening it, not because I was afraid of what I'd see, but because I knew exactly what it was. The public affairs video, the same one that had been posted that morning. Someone had copied the link and forwarded it, stripped of context like evidence. When I clicked, the familiar frame appeared, the banner behind the stage, the podium, the flags, my name lower third, clean and official. The sound was crisp, the pacing unhurried. Nothing sensational, just documentation. I closed it and leaned back in my chair. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Rachel. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then my mother texted, "Why didn't you tell us it was a medal?" I stared at the words longer than necessary. Not because I didn't understand them, but because of what they implied. Not congratulations. Not we're proud. Just confusion edged with accusation, like the truth had arrived improperly packaged. I typed carefully. I told you what it was. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. You said awards banquet, she replied. We didn't realize it was like this. Like this. Formal, public, documented. Another message followed, this time from my father. Someone tagged Rachel under that video. People were asking questions. I could picture it clearly now. Rachel's phone lighting up at the table, a name tag in the comments, A cousin's casual recognition, the awkward pause when curiosity won, the volume in the restaurant fading as the video played on a small screen instead of a mounted TV. No grand reveal, just discomfort. We looked foolish, my father added. There it was. Not I'm sorry, not I was wrong, just the thing that mattered most to him, how it reflected on them. I exhaled slowly and replied, I didn't do anything to make you look anyway. I invited you. The response didn't come right away. When it did, it wasn't what I expected. Why didn't you explain better? My mother wrote. I felt something settle behind my eyes. Not anger, not sadness, but a kind of weary recognition. This was the same question they'd asked my whole life, framed differently every time. Why didn't you make us understand? Why didn't you translate yourself into something easier for us to accept? I set my phone down and finished my workday. That night, I didn't hear from them again. The next morning there was nothing. No calls, no texts. The group chat stayed quiet, frozen at the last message, like a door left ajar, but not crossed. Days passed. The internet did what it always does. The video gathered a modest number of views, comments from people on base, a few supportive notes from spouses of other service members. Nothing viral, nothing dramatic, just a record that existed and couldn't be taken back. I went on with my life. The first sign of movement came nearly 2 weeks later. It was my mother. She called mid-morning, which was unusual. She usually texted first. I watched the phone ring, considered letting it go, then answered.
Hi, I said.
Her voice sounded careful, measured. I just wanted to check in. I'm okay, I replied. I know, she said quickly. I mean, how's work? There it was. The tentative reach. Not an apology, not a celebration, just curiosity, fragile and unpracticed. It's busy, I said. Same as usual.
She paused.
Your father watched the video again, she added. He didn't say much. I'm not surprised. Another pause. He sent a link to his brother, she said. Didn't add anything, just the link. I closed my eyes briefly. That was progress in its own muted way. My father didn't speak easily about feelings. He shared articles instead. Links, proof without commentary. Okay, I said. After that, the contact stayed minimal but different. My mother texted once a week. Short questions, neutral tone, no demands. My father sent 2 messages over the next month. Both brief. Saw something about the Air Force on the news today. Thought of you. Rachel stayed silent. No apology arrived. No confession of regret. No dramatic turnaround. And strangely, that felt right. One evening after another long day, I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand and realized something important. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for them to admit anything. Not for the right words. The shift had already happened not in them, but in me. They had seen the work. They had been forced to confront it without my help, without my framing. And now they were adjusting slowly, awkwardly, incomplete. That was as much as I was ever going to get. And for the first time, it was enough. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Nothing dramatic happened. No explosive arguments, no tearful reconciliations, just space, real space this time. Not the kind created by avoidance, but the kind shaped by acceptance. I noticed the difference in small ways. My mother stopped asking questions that carried an agenda. She didn't try to redirect my life back towards something she understood. Instead, she asked things she'd never asked before. How long my days were, whether I liked my current assignment, if I had enough time to rest. The questions came haltingly like a language she was still learning. My father remained distant, but not dismissive. That alone felt like a shift. When he texted, it was brief, practical, always about something external. An article, a photo, a mention of the Air Force on the news. He never said my name directly in those messages, but he didn't need to. I recognized them for what they were. Acknowledgments without vulnerability, the only kind he knew how to offer. Rachel stayed quiet. At first, I braced myself for her return. A message laced with sarcasm, a complaint about embarrassment, a reframing of events that put her back at the center. None of it came. Weeks passed. Then a month, I realized I didn't miss her voice in my head. That realization surprised me more than anything else. For most of my life, Rachel had been the measuring stick, the louder presence, the person I'd been compared to without consent. Even when I stopped competing, I'd still carried her shadow. Without her commentary, the silence felt lighter, less crowded. At work, nothing changed, and everything did. I moved through my days with a steadiness that felt earned. The medal lived in a drawer in my apartment, not hidden, just placed somewhere safe. Not everything needed to be on display to matter. That lesson had taken me years to learn, and I wasn't interested in unlearning it. Now, one afternoon, I was walking back from a meeting when my supervisor caught up with me in the hallway. "Hey," she said, "how's your family doing?" I considered the question.
"They're adjusting," I replied.
She smiled knowingly. That's usually how it goes. It struck me then how many people around me had lived versions of this story. Not just in the military, anywhere discipline and sacrifice didn't translate cleanly into dinner table conversation. Anywhere work mattered more than optics. Later that evening, my mother called again.
"I talked to your aunt today," she said.
She mentioned the video. I waited. She said, "It must have taken a lot of trust for your supervisor to put your name forward." My mother continued.
"I didn't realize it worked like that." "It does," I said gently.
Another pause, then quieter. I should have asked more. There it was. Not an apology, but an opening. "I'm here now," she added, almost like she was testing the words. "I know," I said. After we hung up, I sat with the feeling for a long time. Not relief, not vindication, just understanding. People don't always change because you explain yourself better. Sometimes they change because reality arrives without your permission and stays. I thought about the younger version of myself, the one who'd kept offering pieces of her life like proof, who'd waited for recognition that never came. If I could speak to her now, I wouldn't tell her to try harder. I'd tell her to stop translating. Because here's the truth. I learned too late to make it easier, but early enough to make it useful. You cannot force people to value what they've already decided to minimize. What you can do is live in a way that no longer requires their agreement. The distance between me and my family didn't disappear. It clarified. It took shape. And once it had a shape, it stopped hurting. It became something I could navigate, something I could choose. And in that choice, I found a calm I'd never had before. There's a moment after a long day when the bass quiets down in a particular way. The engines stop. The hallway's empty. The lights hum softly, steady, and indifferent. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything of you. It just exists. That's when I usually take a breath and take stock. The ceremony had come and gone. The video had made its slow, unceremonious rounds. My family had adjusted awkwardly, imperfectly, in their own time. Life moved forward because that's what life does, whether you're ready or not. What surprised me wasn't their reaction. It was mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel like I'd finally won anything. What I felt was steadiness. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that settles in after you stop performing for approval. I thought a lot about honor during that time. Not the kind printed on certificates or pinned to uniforms, but the quieter version, the one you live with. The one that shows up when no one is watching, when the metrics disappear, and you're left alone with your choices. Honor, I realized, isn't something your family gives you. It's something you carry when you keep showing up anyway. My parents never sat me down and said we were wrong. They never used the words I once rehearsed hearing. They didn't have to. Their shift was subtler than that, less satisfying maybe, but more honest. My mother asked better questions. My father stopped minimizing. He didn't praise, but he didn't belittle either. In his world, that was a real change. Rachel remained distant. I stopped wondering what that meant, because the truth was, I no longer needed resolution from her to move forward. There's a particular relief that comes when you stop expecting people to become who you needed them to be. It's not resignation, it's clarity. You see them as they are, not as a problem to solve, but as a boundary to respect. And boundaries, I learned, can be acts of love, too. I kept serving. I kept doing the work that mattered to me. I mentored younger airmen who reminded me of myself. Quiet, capable, unsure if their contributions were being noticed. I told them the truth I wished I'd heard sooner. You don't have to be loud to matter. You just have to be consistent. Sometimes they'd nod, sometimes they wouldn't. Either way, the words were planted. On weekends, I'd visit my parents occasionally. The visits were different now, calmer, shorter. There was less posturing, fewer assumptions. We talked about neutral things: weather, news, food. Occasionally, my work came up not as a point of contention, but as a fact. That was enough. One afternoon, my father handed me his phone without saying much. He'd pulled up an article about an Air Force unit supporting disaster relief. He pointed at it and said, "This kind of coordination matters." It wasn't about me, and somehow that made it mean more. I thought again about that drawer. The one where my early wins had gone to rest among forgotten manuals and loose batteries. For a long time, I'd believed that drawer defined my worth in my family, that being placed there meant I was temporary, replaceable, easy to overlook. Now I understood something different.
That drawer was never about me.
It was about what my family knew how to value at the time, and what they didn't. I didn't take my medal out often. It stayed where I put it, safe and unremarkable. When I looked at it, I didn't think about the ceremony or the comments or the link that traveled further than I expected. I thought about the long days, the quiet decisions, the trust placed in me when things were uncertain. That was the real reward. If you're listening to this and parts of it feel uncomfortably familiar, if you've ever invited people to see your life and watched them choose something else, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not required to convince anyone of your worth. Not your parents, not your siblings, not the people who only understand success when it looks like theirs. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself and for them is to stop explaining and start living. People change slowly, if at all. Families adjust in increments, not leaps. And sometimes the best outcome isn't reconciliation, it's peace. The kind that comes from knowing who you are without needing consensus. I didn't need my family to stand up and clap. I needed to stand firm when they didn't. And in doing that, I found something far more durable than approval. I found myself. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own quiet efforts, your own overlooked moments, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from or what part of this story felt closest to home. There are so many stories like this, and they deserve to be shared. If you want to keep listening, keep reflecting, and keep finding meaning in the spaces between the noise, consider subscribing. We share stories like this regularly. Let's keep going together.